What's it like to experience an Olympic bobsled? Ride the new Sarajevo Bobsled at Six Flags Great Adventure and see the incredible new Sarajevo Bobsled, because everyone needs a great adventure.
Hello. We are doing something a little bit different right now. I have made my way all the way up to Great Escape, and after a 3.5-hour drive, there is one goal for today, and that is to ride the recently announced to be closing soon Alpine Bobsled. Now you might be wondering, why spend all this time to come up this way? Well, the main thing is that it opened originally before being relocated here over at Six Flags Great Adventure as the Sarajevo Bobsled, and we'll talk about it a little bit more once I've ridden it. So that was about as janky as I expected it would be. There's no weight distribution factoring in. I sat in the front, and it led to a very interesting experience because as you're going down the troughs, you kind of like rise up against the trough, and then like the nose of the ride vehicle feels like it's pointing downward quite a bit. But I'm sure the feeling is much more exaggerated than how it looks visually, and we're probably in no real danger, but it feels like you're kind of like slipping side to side rather than it being like a smooth like side to side type of thing. And then there's also those brake runs, which I believe used to be manned, like they had to have an attendant there each time. But the experience of like once you're like done going through the troughs, there's like this crazy like to straighten you out before you reach the next section or before you reach the final brake run. It was bumpy, very bumpy, lovingly janky. I actually kind of enjoyed it. But sadly, for whatever reason, and I don't believe it's for another relocation, Great Escape / Six Flags decided to close this up as of September 4th, which at the time that I'm here is going to be in 2 weeks, but I'm sure by the time most of you see this, it's already going to be closed, which is unfortunate to see this piece of history go away. Speaking of history, though, it's pretty interesting to see how this kind of, if we go back in time a little bit, how kind of like the bobsled coaster kind of started as like this flying turns, wooden trough type of thing. But because, and you know that the flying turns at Knoebels is kind of a callback to all of that, but it does take a lot of maintenance for something to be wood like that. And with old school technology, it just fell out of fashion to have it. It required a lot of maintenance and a lot of people to operate. So then back in like the early 80s, Six Flags was looking for something to kind of up their game, and Intamin was coming out with a bobsled coaster, but with a metal trough, right? This kind of was developing at around the same time that the Winter Olympics were coming. And so Six Flags capitalized that, planning on putting a roller coaster, opening one at both Great Adventure and Magic Mountain for the 1984 season. So focusing over on Great Adventure, 1983 for them was an awesome year, attendance records, this and that. So 1984 was going to introduce this bobsled coaster, which was the first of its kind in the world. They were the first ones to install it. The other installations would come later. There was a commercial about it. There was not much information because the installation hadn't happened yet, so I don't believe there was much marketing material that featured the ride itself. Having never been built, you couldn't take photos or videos of it. Over at Great Adventure, it used to be over at the Good Time Alley game / boardwalk area by where the parachute ride is now. Eventually, you know, when that was relocated, it would make way for the Great American Scream Machine, but it's worth noting that the ride vehicles were different at that time, being inline, I believe 3 or 4 passengers at a time, and it was kind of like, if you imagine like how Space Mountain is over at Magic Kingdom, or the Matterhorns, you might be in the lap of somebody or like really up against somebody you don't know just because of weight distribution, especially if like you're a single rider. The interesting thing about how it was assembled is that the track itself is just bolted together. which I think they did purposely because they had a relocation program, a ride relocation program, and had that in mind for when, you know, it was time to make way for something new at Great Adventure. This could be relocated to a different park, which it eventually was. Now, once they opened, I know they did run a pretty funny, like, bring a snowball type of promotion, meaning, like, if you had a snowball and you saved it, they started this promotion, like, in the off-season. Save a snowball and bring it to Great Adventure. You would get in for free and then be able to go ride the roller coaster. But a couple of things that they realized early on is that the track itself was very susceptible to any sort of moisture. If it was too humid, if it had rained a little, it would completely alter the way that the bobsleds would go. So they had to often shut it down. It was very temperamental. So just like I've experienced here, hoping to ride the Alpine Bobsled at Great Escape, it's just, you're never really sure when it's going to be operating. I feel very fortunate to have been able to ride it today. In addition to that, it didn't have the greatest capacity. The rider throughput was fairly low. So in order to circumvent that, they had to create brake runs. And in order to implement that, that meant more attendants. At first, they started with like 1 or 2 for the 3 brake runs, and somebody would be going back and forth to make sure that, you know, this is when they would manually do it. It wasn't electronic. Eventually, they did have 3 attendants, 1 per brake run, to kind of keep things moving. If you've been to Great Adventure and rode the log flume, it's very similar to that, where there's 3 different brake runs, and there's attendants there that can stop the ride if it's needed. Eventually, after operating for only 4 years at Great Adventure, it was moved over to Six Flags Great America and was renamed Rolling Thunder, which is very appropriate. I hadn't heard this operate before, but as it's going around, it does sound a bit like you take that big sheet of steel and you try to make thunder yourself. It's kind of like that sound, which I'll showcase it here right now. When the roller coaster was relocated to Six Flags Great America, they made one very big improvement, and that was to the ride vehicle. B&M created a new one that accommodated up to 8 guests at a time. It also made loading faster because previously with the inline 6 riders max, they had to separate them out at Great Adventure and split them apart and have simultaneous loading because it took that long. So here, having an extra row of 2 and having them across, it was as easy as just picking your row and taking a seat. Eventually, in 1996, the ride was shut down over at Great America and planned to be relocated here at Great Escape. It made a little bit more sense because this was a former storybook park that was owned by Premier, and Premier had just acquired Six Flags around that time. Given that the rider capacity was pretty low, it kind of fit the pace and the crowd level here at the park. The ride would open here, entitled Alpine Bobsled, in 1998, and it's one of 5 that were ever installed. So it is a bit of history here to haven't been able to finally ride this. I don't believe that they're ever really going to revisit this style of ride, seeing the way that roller coasters have evolved now. I want to say that Flying Turns is probably the most modern of the bobsled coasters that we've ever gotten, and it's cool to have been able to see the difference between that Anaconda and Alpine Bobsled. I did mention earlier that Magic Mountain also installed one of these bobsled coasters around the same time Great Adventure did. It did close and get relocated. It's now La Vibora over at Six Flags over Texas, so there is still an opportunity to ride one if you want to experience this bit of history. Anyway, all that being said, I hope you enjoyed this little bit of history. I am feeling so fortunate to have been able to ride the Alpine Bobsled, knowing that it's going to be gone. Maybe someday I'll hopefully, fingers crossed, get to go to Six Flags over Texas. But for now, I am just happy to have been able to ride this ride that opened originally at Six Flags Great Adventure, which is my home park. If you've ridden this ride, definitely let me know down below like what your thoughts are on it. I thought it was a wonderful bit of history, a little bit janky, but very charming. Anyway, I'm going to leave things here. So for now, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time, and I hope you go make your own adventure. Bye.